All right, I call the meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization Administration and Finance Committee to order for March 2nd, 2023. This is the notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. I want to just amend this to say if someone likes the band Creed, we're not going to work with them. Okay. That's a joke. That's a joke. Okay. Don't,
I got the joke.
my own prison. Okay. I will read. These are the virtual meeting guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. I don't know what passively speaking is, but anyway. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on either the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button on the toolbar. With a raise hand, the chair, that's me, will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical questions, please contact Mr. Jonathan Church via the chat box, via email at jchurch@ctps.org, or by telephone at 857-702-3709. This is the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to fully participate in this meeting, please contact Jonathan Church, MPO staff, via email at jchurch@ctps.org, or via telephone at 857-702-3709. Introductions. Good morning, everyone. Happy March. I'm Brian Kane. I chair the ANF committee for the Boston Region MPO, and my day job is executive director of the MBTA Advisory Board. Eric, why don't you say hello and then pass it on to someone else?
Good morning, Eric Barassa, Director of Transportation with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I will pass it to Len Diggins.
Thank you, Eric. I'm Leonard Diggins. I am chair of the Advisory Council on behalf of the MBTA Right Oversight Committee, and I will pass it to Derek Cravat.
Good morning, everybody. Derek Cravat, the manager of MPO activities at MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. And not sure I see another member, so I'll turn it over back to
all the members.
Yep.
Who's Sick AG iPhone DX besides having the best handle?
I know, isn't that? Yeah.
Wow. Is that your Sith apprentice, Len?
Oh, it's sick as something. I mean, so sick as G. What I mean, what's the G for? You know.
Well, if you are a member of the committee, Sick AG, let us know. Otherwise, welcome. Okay, we will now move on to public comments. If there is anyone who would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand function, and I would be delighted to call upon you to make your comment to the committee. I see we have 13 people participating on this meeting. I do not see any hands raised at this time. Make that 14. If during the meeting you would like to make a comment, we would just love to hear from you. So raise your hand and I'll do my best to call upon you. Move on to item 3, which is the summary of the February 2nd, 2023 meeting, which was in the meeting materials online. I wonder if any member has a motion to make at this time with respect to this.
Make a
I will
motion
make a motion to approve.
Second.
I heard Eric make it and Derek second it. Jonathan, you want to call the roll, please?
Sure. Brian Kane,
Yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
and Leonard Diggins.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, item 4, which is our main topic today. We're going to follow up on the discussion to clarify the process for approval of the executive director's evaluation and compensation. So for context, folks might remember, we had a pretty long discussion about the hiring process to get an executive director on board in the event that there is a vacancy, which of course we know will not happen because Tegan is never leaving. So this is the discussion of the process of how we approve the executive director, whomever they may be, compensation and annual evaluation. And I want to begin the topic by saying there are lots of ways to do this. This is one of those things that is a real kind of slog to get through, but it is very important. And is also, I believe, a requirement of state law that all employers have some kind of an employee file. We are supposed to do this kind of evaluation for the appointees, the people that we appoint. I believe the MPO itself appoints the executive director, therefore it is the MPO's collective responsibility to maintain this file, do this evaluation, and ensure it is up to date. And it's just one of those things that's a real drag. I'm sure none of us like to do employee evaluations or go through employee evaluations, but it's just something we as responsible employers have to do. The question of compensation is also an interesting one. It brings up many other things such as budget and benchmarking, competitiveness, and the whole ball of wax that is MassDOT, OTP, CTPS, planning in general, and the competitiveness amongst all of those. So MAPC has a role as the fiduciary agent. We have a role as the A&F committee in terms of setting the budget, which would include the executive director's salary. And I also want to note that compensation also includes benefits. CTPS are part of the GIC, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, which is the Group Insurance Commission, which allows, which is what state employees get their health insurance under. And they are also in the Commonwealth's retirement system, which is what most public sector employees are in for retirement. It's a pension plan. It's a very good plan. And I have legislation pending to get into it. So clearly I like it. So there are some things we can do around compensation, and there are some things we can't do around compensation. When I say this, I mean benefits. We can talk about other fringe benefits, but we also have to make sure that we're being equitable and fair across the board. So do we have something to put up on this one, or did you want me to just kind of work through it? No. Okay. Let me find my notes then, if you'll all just pardon me for a second. So Eric, I want to put the spotlight on you for a second. Can you talk a little bit about what you recall from the last time we went through this, hiring the executive director, and kind of how the process worked for determining compensation and evaluation?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so this is separate from the document, right? That is posted. This is really about evaluation compensation. I think on the compensation side, we didn't write anything down about like what that process would be in the memo. I think that was somewhat of a negotiation, and I think that was a conversation that Mark Drayson and David Mueller had about salary and kind of looking at comparable salaries within kind of like MAPC and MassDOT and maybe some other agencies. But that we didn't write anything down. I think it would be good to document this as part of the operations plan and kind of how that goes about occurring.
Okay. So I agree. Well, a good place to usually start with these conversations is kind of what we do now. And so I have been I have, working with staff, figured out kind of what we do now. And this doesn't,
So on the evaluation process.
Yeah.
You know, something that occurred during, when Carl Quackenbush was executive director, was Carl would write up an annual evaluation, and it would go to the MassDOT, it would go to the chair, it would go to MAPC, and it would go to the ANF chair. And then the three would jointly meet and discuss the written evaluation. And then I think then the chair would meet with Carl to go over it.
when you say the
and-
chair, whom was that?
David Moeller, yeah. And second, I don't think that happens anymore. Honestly, I don't think that's really happens in the past couple of years.
So what has happened since I've begun is similar, but it has only been shared with David Muller and Mark Drayson.
Okay.
And I don't think that was necessarily intentional. I mean, it kind of came up in an ad hoc way, and that was just the process as it unfolded since I've been here. So I used the old form that CTPS has had for all of its employees to do a self-evaluation.
Right.
And I filled that out and submitted that. But our evaluation process has also now changed as an organization. So there's some changes on multiple fronts here.
I
Okay,
mean, it seems to me that there's two separate things. One is when you're hiring a new executive director, what is the process for coming up with the salary range, and who does that negotiation, right?
Mhm.
So I think that needs to be kind of clarified.
Mhm.
And it could be that, it could be that a salary range is established by, again, it could be very simple. Like we just say, either this committee or a subset of this group, establishes the salary range. I think the document says something about posting the salary range, right?
Mhm.
And that is our practice now. And that is pretty much, I think, standard in the industry. 10 or 15 years ago, very few people posted salary ranges. But now you waste all this time if you bring somebody in, and then at the
Right.
end you offer them something that they're like, oh, I was expecting much higher than that. And it's like this waste of time. So I think, MassDOT, everybody posts, MBTA, everybody posts a salary range at this point. So maybe it's establishing that, through this process, that's the salary range.
Mhm.
And then it's identifying, who does that sort of, you can't negotiate, via a committee. Like Brian, I don't even know, what is like the MBTA advisory board process? Is that like with your entire, I mean, I'm sure you don't do that with your entire committee, right? It's like probably with the chair.
So yeah, I actually have an employment agreement that's signed by the chair and the vice chair of my board. And I think similar to what's happened in many places, we pulled a process together sort of out of thin air. So yes, we're going to codify that as well. I just want to note that at our meeting in February, we decided that the search committee in developing the job posting would finalize the draft job posting timeframe, posting locations, and salary range.
Yeah.
So you're right, Eric. So we have a salary range, and then, yeah, I think there has to be, and that salary range theoretically would be based on benchmarking around the industry, around the ecosystem, for lack of a better term, that we're all kind of in. And then there would be a negotiation within that range. You're correct, sort of once we do that. And I think you're right. That's going to be a smaller subset of folks. It sounds like the last time it happened, it was Mark and David. We can discuss the relative merits of that versus not. I mean, theoretically, Mark's not even a member of the MPO, and David's the designee of the secretary. In reality, however, they kind of are very important to the process. So, we have to be cognizant of reality. So I'm okay with sort of how that works. I guess we didn't make reference in the last document to who would kind of make the final decision on the salary. So, and we don't have to. We can leave this a little vague, and that's okay. These things get worked out. Mr. Brad Ross, and I see your hand is up, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian. Good morning, team. Thanks for recognizing me. So Eric and Brian's points just raised a question in my mind, which I think you both mentioned benchmarking and industry standards. And I just want to understand whether this committee and whether this operations plan would propose to document and benchmark similar position types. At the municipal level, we've done stuff like that a few different times in the 15 years that I've served Somerville, and it's been really, really helpful in our efforts to attract and retain staff, but also to demonstrate to our stakeholders why we risk a brain drain if we are not competitive with peer agencies, whether public or private. And so I would respectfully suggest that this operations plan could be strengthened if there's an acknowledgement of the need for that type of transparency. And then I do go even a step further. I mentioned this 2 weeks ago. Anything that you all discuss with the ED hiring process, I feel strongly is transferable to senior management and rank and file staff at the MPO. I'm really worried about the brain drain. I mentioned it last time. We have tremendous resources flowing to Mass DOT and MBTA. And I think this group should be very honest about incentives for great staff, including some of those we've talked about just over the last couple of weeks, leaving this organization because pay scales are not competitive. Thank you.
Completely agree, Brad. And just so you are aware, I had a discussion about this yesterday on the 4th floor of 10 Park Plaza. It is a big concern of mine, and I certainly share your concerns. And to your point, Tegan, I'll get to you in a second. I guess what I would suggest is that, yes, we should codify benchmarking. I would suggest that it be some kind of a survey of other MPO staff, executive directors in the Commonwealth with other comparable positions in Boston. We all know that the executive director of the Franklin County Council of Governments, God love them, has a different set of tasks to handle than the person doing it for Boston. That's just the reality of the situation. So I would be very happy to kind of try to put together some kind of language around benchmarking and without being proscriptive, be descriptive of sort of who we think whoever does this in the future should kind of look at, survey, get a sense of. Tegan, please go ahead. Tegan, where'd you go?
I'm here.
Hello.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add that I think goes along with this conversation nicely is that about two years ago, I guess, for the first time, we piggybacked on a process that MEPC did first, and then we did it for CTPS staff separately, employing a compensation consulting group to do an assessment of all of the jobs at the agency. So we have developed job descriptions for all of the jobs at the agency. We had that consultant a couple of years ago benchmark and create assigned grades and ranges for the different jobs at the agency. And we did a partial update of that assessment just over the last couple of months because the market has been so volatile for some of these core positions that we have. So the nice thing is that, I mean, what I wouldn't want to do is just trust that to be up to date and, you know, in the best shape at some point in the future when you were doing the hiring for an executive director, but at least there should be some kind of compensation structure in place. And so this could be complementary to that or supplemental to that or an update to that or, you know, and that is relevant for all staff. So I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that we did have that structure in place and that this could supplement that or relate to it somehow.
Hold on, Eric, I'll get to you in 1 second. So Tegan, what if we put in the operations plan kind of not necessarily under the executive director section, but under the employee section, that, you know, every 3-4 years, the organization should go through a compensation review, that we budget for it, that it is just sort of routine SOP things that we do. And I would ask you and Jonathan to figure out where to put that in the whole operations plan so that we can eventually codify it. And it would apply, of course, here as well as to other employees. And because I completely agree with what Brad said, we are losing folks, but we also have to address the elephant in the room, I think, a little bit, which is we as an MPO can put all of the salary ranges we want forward. And if the OTP doesn't want to do it, it's not going to happen. So what do? How do we as MPO members with our MPO hats on say, no, this is important and we need to recruit and retain high quality staff to do high quality work for this region that, yes, it's a little bit competitive with the Office of Transportation Planning and the MBTA and cities and towns, all of whom are trying to hire desperately transportation planners because there just aren't enough. And so if CTPS is going to be the employer of last resort, what does that mean for the region? And when I say last resort, I mean in terms of wages and compensation. Eric, please go ahead.
Yeah, Brad, I appreciate those comments. I think that's really important to be thinking about. I think just going back to the executive director piece here, I think for as I put in the chat, I think for the job offer and the compensation offer, I think as long as it's within the range, I think it's fine for like one person, like the chair, to do that because the MPO board will have already approved it. Even if it ends up at the top of the range, it's still within the range.
Yep.
I think for the annual evaluation process, I think staff should actually put that maybe into this document, document what that process is, about about doing a self-evaluation. And I think that I think it makes sense to involve the chair of the A&F committee because that evaluation will involve a compensation, a salary increase component to it, presumably. And I think even in that conversation, there's discussion of agency, staff salaries and things like that. So I think it makes sense to have the A&F chair participate since there's a budgetary, implication to that conversation. And Tegan, if you disagree with any of this, feel free. If you feel like it should be a smaller, more private discussion, but that's kind of what we did with Carl. And it seemed, like that worked, but I'm just kicking that out there for discussion.
So yeah, thank you, Eric. Let's see if we can just finalize compensation before we move on to evaluation, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because I just want to be cognizant of time. We get 5 more minutes and then I want to move on to compensation. So I'm sorry, evaluation. In terms of compensation then, what I'm hearing is we're going to put a more broad salary benefit review in to the overall employee section of this operations plan. That will, of course, apply to the executive director as well as to all employees. I would ask that be brought to the A&F committee and to the full board at least every 3 years. And then that puts the onus on us to remember to do that. It's always great to have these things written down, but someone has to actually do it. But we can at least budget for it that way. In terms of so yeah, that'll take care of sort of the benchmarking piece. And then I think to go back to the hiring committee that we sort of put together last time, I agree with you, Eric. It's okay for one person to kind of take the reins and have that discussion, as long as we are very cognizant of open meeting law and all that good stuff. These things find a way to happen in the public sector, and that's okay. So I'm comfortable leaving it a little vague. I guess what I would suggest is, to your point, Eric, that we will have this benchmarking process. The search committee already has the authority to set the range, which will be agreed and negotiated theoretically through the budget process, and with full participation by MAPC as the fiduciary agent and the secretary's office as the chair. And this committee, I would add, because we have the final budget, kind of not the final budget, but we recommend a budget to the full board. And then that will get us kind of a process. And then at some point, someone will emerge to kind of do the final negotiation with the candidate and come up with a number that, of course, will have to come back and ultimately go to the full MPO for its approval. And I think as long as we have that rooted in reality through this benchmarking process or whatever we're calling it, I think it's okay. But I want to look at you, Tegan. I want to look at you, Jonathan. I want to look at the staff and say, does what I'm saying make sense? Tegan, go ahead.
I think in general, what you're saying makes sense to me. I did have one question. When you talked about full MPO approval, like just kind of at the end of your statement there, were you thinking that before an offer is made that the full board weighs in? Because I feel like that's difficult in terms of process and timing.
No.
So what did you mean? What would the full board be approving in that process? Just so I get that really clear.
Well, ultimately, I believe the full board approves the hiring of the executive director
okay,
via a
yes, got it,
resolution. So
got it. Okay,
that's what I mean.
okay. Thank you.
I also just want to quickly bring up one thing, which is I am also okay with giving the executive director an employment agreement for a longer term that can include these things in it, include in terms of evaluation and in terms of compensation. It is a tool that could help us recruit and retain the next executive director for sort of a longer duration. These things tend to last 3 years. They tend to be pretty descriptive in what the folks have to do. It includes their job description. It includes benefits. It includes all that good stuff. It gives people a little bit of confidence that there is a process, and then it kind of holds the parties to that process a little bit. So I guess I would ask if there are no objections, or we can certainly discuss this, that option be put on the table for the search committee stroke board chair to utilize, should they so choose. It's also fine to be an employee at will. And I just want to let the people doing the next search negotiation have that option. Okay. Cool. All right, let's move on to evaluation. Evaluation. Everyone's favorite time of year, employee evaluation time. Tegan, can you talk a little bit about what the current sort of self-evaluation process is at CTPS and how it's evolving, which I think you mentioned?
Sure. Yeah, I guess, why don't I start with what it was the last time I did a review, and then I'll talk about how it's evolved. So our prior practice was we had a form, and the form asked various questions about, what are your achievements, what are your challenges, what are your goals, and how did you work towards your last goals, your goals the last evaluation round. And both an employee fills out a self-evaluation, and then the supervisor fills out a evaluation of the employee. So there's 2 documents, and then the supervisor and employee met to discuss, and then at the end of it, there's a signed final version of that form that is submitted to the records. Actually, both the self and the supervisor. So to date, I have been filling out my own version of that self-evaluation and then submitting that to Mark and to David, and then we meet, we discuss. There's no form that they fill out in my case. So we meet, we discuss, I make changes, and then that's submitted as the final evaluation. What we have evolved to is, and we would do a mid-year evaluation check-in, which was just sort of a basic check-in with employees, but that was not with the executive director, that was just with the CTPS employees generally. What we've evolved to is a multiple step process where we have what we're calling now an employee development plan, which is much more of a conversation. There's one form, and it's a conversation between the employee and the supervisor about setting goals for the coming year and the things that the employee wants to accomplish and is striving to accomplish. Certain elements of that plan and certain goals are then also marked for assessment when we get to the performance assessment period, which is about 9 months later. that happens a few months before the start of the state fiscal year and is more quantitative. It's still qualitative, but there's a level of scoring on the employee's performance in that performance assessment that the supervisor does. And then that then informs salary adjustments that are recommended and then finalized by the leadership team for each staff person. So it's now an employee development plan and then a performance assessment. And that performance assessment is linked to salary, and the employee development plan is kind of independent from the salary adjustments.
That's a lot of work.
We've worked really hard to keep it simple for what it's worth. I mean, we needed a framework, we felt, to have employee supervisor conversations around goals and aspirations that was not linked to salary. Because when your evaluation is only linked to salary, of course, employees, want to say how amazing they are at everything, right? And not kind of indicate areas for improvement, because your motivation is the salary adjustment. So that's why we separated out those two processes, but we kept the forms really short. We've been getting feedback on them on how to simplify and clarify that process. But I have not applied that process for my role with the executive director. I haven't submitted my form for this year, and so I haven't talked about shifting that process or not for myself.
Okay. Thank you for that. I guess what I kind of envision here is something similar to that, for consistency's sake within the organization. As far as I can tell, it is the appointing authority that is responsible for doing that. As we just discussed, the appointing authority in the case of the Boston Region MPO is the MPO board itself. And I guess what I would suggest we do is in the operations plan, note that, and also note that the MPO delegates that job, authority, whatever, to either this committee or to a committee that's set up specifically to do this evaluation. And then it'll be codified in the operations plan. And then whatever committee that is, whether it's ANF or someone else, and I think it probably should just be us, because we're going to be doing a lot of this stuff anyway, unless anyone really wants to do it, because trust me, I loathe doing HR stuff. It's the worst part of my job, and I think it's the worst part of a lot of people's jobs. What we should then do is establish a set of goals for the executive director at the start of the fiscal year. And I would have that be tied to the operating budget, so we can decide whether that's the state fiscal year or the federal fiscal year. Probably be the federal fiscal year given CTPS's budget. And then in the operations plan, just have mile markers, for lack of a better term, tied to what you just discussed, Tegan, midpoint check-ins. And then we would have to just map out on kind of a calendar when we would want the self-evaluation form, or whatever we're calling it, when we would want the next set of things. And then we would just have to set up time of this committee to kind of go through that process. And so what I'm going to ask you, Tegan, is to try to do that mapping out for us of mapping the fiscal year. And when I say you, someone at CTPS, take the fiscal year calendar, take your current evaluation calendar, and try to map them as best you can, so that there will be check-ins by this committee or whatever committee the MPO decides will do this work. And that way we'll have a roadmap for ourselves. So we'll start with the start of the fiscal year, which theoretically will tie into the end of the last one. That will sort of note, the goal setting process. We'll have the goal setting process kind of be the kickoff of the fiscal year, and we'll schedule some check-ins along the way for us as a committee and a group to do that, check in with the executive director. I feel pretty strongly that it should be a committee of MPO members. And I do feel pretty strongly that we do have to note that the MPO itself, the MPO board is the appointing authority and is delegating this task it has to do to a subset of itself. And then, of course, at some point, this committee would report up to the full board on its efforts, its work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and give the full board an opportunity to weigh in and respond to the work of the committee, because we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that we are doing this work on behalf of the full regional MPO board. And it is for them and to them that we are toiling. But I just said a lot of stuff there. What do people think of that wacky concept? Is it too convoluted? And I guess what I would suggest is next time we meet, Jonathan, actually, you won't even be here, will you? My goodness. Well, Jonathan or Emily or someone, try to map this out for us in a visual form, so that we can kind of see on a calendar or on a timeline or something how it would work. Anyway, Mr. Len Biggins, the Sith Lord himself, I saw you unmute. No, he's muted. Wow.
No, sorry. I mean, I did a mute. It was...
Did your mask stop working? You couldn't breathe?
No, I don't have a problem with my mask, at all, actually. But I kind of accidentally unmuted prematurely, because I had completely formed my thought. But let me just go at it now. So, how do you incorporate input being from people that are being supervised? I mean, so like on your middle management level, when it comes to the evaluation of the middle managers, how do the people that they are managing input into that process taken?
So are you talking about the kind of the upwards feedback to the
Yeah, the upwards feedback.
To the supervisees? Yeah. So what we've done over the last 2 years, I'm not sure that there was a process prior to the last few years. And what we've done the last few years is tried 2 different formats. One was an anonymous survey that allowed employees to identify the supervisor they were making comments on, and then we asked them to kind of rate the supervisor on a number of things, like how well they motivate the employee to do their job, for example, and then provide some opportunity for open comment. And then this past year, we tried it where we asked the employees to identify themselves, and then also similarly provide, ratings and comments. That information is taken in by the leadership team at the top level, and then either summarized or disseminated from there, so that those being reviewed don't read the exact, words and comments coming from the commenter, as a little bit of a buffer and kind of a way to sort of make sure that things are framed constructively and helpfully. So we've been testing that out these last 2 years and still kind of thinking about best ways to do that.
Because the reason I ask is that, because when it comes to evaluation of you, I'm wondering how would it be best for the executive director, for the chair of the board, and I guess the executive director of MPC to seek and get input from people on the board. It's board members. So, because it seems to me that's not happening now, but it may very well be that it's happening, but they're just not asking me, which is fine.
Sorry, Len, do you mean for everybody at CTPS or just the ED position?
Just the ED position. So I was trying to understand what happens at CTPS. So I wasn't trying to us get into the evaluation process at CTPS, but I was trying to understand how that happens there and see how we could map that onto what we would do here with respect to the ED for the PO.
Yeah, so I guess the way I see it is through the goal setting process that the A&F committee would go through on behalf of the board. We would have that discussion. So I think that would be the point
Right.
at which we would have that talk. And I think we've all been in positions throughout our collective careers where you have goals set in a particular point in time, and then life changes at your organization or things. And the goals that were set 12 months ago make no sense by the time you get to the next fiscal year. Is what it is. we're humans and this is not a perfect process. So I think we can be cognizant of that. And I think we can certainly put in a provision that would allow the A&F committee with the, you know, with the consent of the ED to change that. But just so you know, the way I see it is the goal setting process kind of at the beginning of the fiscal year is that thing that you're talking about, where we as a committee of the board would go through kind of that process to say, you know, how should we be evaluating the executive director? What are the metrics? What are the goals, the milestones, et cetera, putting it down on paper as best we can, which is always hard to do by committee. And then kind of having either quarterly check-ins or something throughout the fiscal year tied to that. And I hope that makes sense. And it's not too convoluted, because it sounds really convoluted now as I say it.
Well, no, I get it, you know, but I also want to separate, I think, goals from performance, because as you said, I mean, goals can change due to circumstances, but the way a person handles, the day-to-day, how they handle, the change in priorities, it's more a function of performance, and so you want that. You want also be able to assess those leadership qualities that are important to the organization. And I, for one, I like HR. I don't think it's my forte, but I think it's important, and I do like seeing these processes that do take time, because I think it reflects to the employees, staff, that we care about them as people, and people are complex, and it takes time, to go through the process. But it's time, I think, well spent. And an organization that does that well is an organization that is able to retain staff even when they can get paid better elsewhere. That's it. Thanks.
No, I completely agree. And that's one of the reasons why I brought up the employment agreement discussion, which kind of takes the money question out of the performance question. And if the salary is laid out, at least for a short period of time, in theory, then you really just get into the performance question. And it's not like a carrot and stick thing where, you know, if you don't do what we say, we're not going to give you any more money.
Right.
But, you know, then the tacit understanding there is that when that agreement expires in a couple of years, all of the performance evaluations that have happened will be brought to bear, whether or not they're retained or not. So that's why I brought it up.
You're good at this, Brian. So maybe it takes someone who doesn't like HR to be good at it. Therefore, you're bound to do it more.
Maybe I've spent too much time with HR.
There you go. Thank you.
Over my career. No.
The principal's office, yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Darth Diggins.
Even better.
You gotta have fun doing this, folks. If you can't laugh, it's either laugh or cry.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I think, I hope Tegan, Jonathan, Emily, whomever is left standing, this makes sense, that what we're trying to lay out is an evaluation timeline tied to kind of goals and expectations setting that are not set in proverbial stone, but are fluid enough to ebb and flow with the organization. And again, I do come back to the employment agreement kind of locks in the money piece and the benefits piece, and then really just makes it more about performance untied to compensation. And I hope I'm clear. Tegan, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of next steps with this, we have the substantial write-up of the hiring process, and what we can start to do is develop, as you said, maybe a draft timeline of what a process like that could look like. We actually won't be meeting now for an extended period of time as A&F. The next meeting would actually be scheduled for the first Thursday in April. So that could give us some time, and I'll actually be gone for 2.5 weeks in that time frame. But we could draft some things, work with you, Brian, kind of leave them in your plate and for you to work with staff that will be here. And then there could be some advanced materials before the next meeting. Is that sort of what you're looking for?
Yes, I get it. Eric, why don't you go ahead, jump in there?
I mean, I feel like what I was thinking here is not something super complicated, was literally like another bullet point at the end of this document that says annually, the executive director will have an evaluation, will meet with some people. I think it could be the chair, the vice chair, the ANF, it could be ANF, I don't know, like that's, and we'll evaluate the executive directors, will evaluate and discuss, salary adjustment. Like, as simple as that. Like, I don't think it needs to be like a whole long thing that talks about, there's already, the operations plan, I feel like it doesn't have to like create every little detail. It just sort of like sets in motion, what's supposed to happen. And then the details of it are, there's already an existing evaluation process that, that CTPS has that will be similar. So I don't know, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I understand where you're coming from, Eric, but then when the people who have to do it, especially if they, are different than us, if they didn't ask, like, what do I do? It'd be nice for them to have some sense of what to do, or at least some really good idea of where to go for that answer. So we could just, if you're not going to be detailed, we at least point them to where they can find those details.
Yeah, and Eric, I think there's a happy medium between sort of one bullet point and like 4 bullet points. I don't want to be overly prescriptive here at all. I want to just sort of give folks a little bit of a framework to hang their hat on, and if the future people sitting in these chairs decide to do more or less, cool. As long as it's okay with the MPO, I think it'll be up to those folks. We can't future-proof this. But yeah, I agree. Let's keep it simple. And so I would sort of say, a bullet that says, yes, there'll be an annual evaluation, and then maybe 2 or 3 sub bullets that say tied to some kind of goal setting process, and just keep it as simple as possible. So yes, I agree with you very much. Nobody wants to slog through this, especially me. All right, so let me look at you, Jonathan, Emily, Logan, etc., Tegan, Harali. You think you've got enough from us to come up with something for a month from now? And I will be around to work with this. I've been taking some notes. I got some stuff that I'll try to share. Do you think are we okay?
Yeah, I think we're okay. I think I will want to confer. We'll confer with you, with the chair, with you, Brian, a bit in between to develop a draft that could be potentially released with, I think, the rest of the committee members well in advance, so that and again, and it can be revised as well the latter half of the month, even when I'm not here. On this topic, Gina Pearl's not here today, but she'll also have a pretty significant role in supporting some of the revision. The other topic that we do have coming up, which we can release a worksheet for, but it may be debatable whether we'll get to it at the next meeting if we're still discussing this, which is the information sharing worksheet. So we can probably, since there's a longer period of time, we can probably get multiple things to you to start to review and think about as a committee for when we next meet.
Yeah, I would suggest we release that information sharing unless anyone has any objections. I think it's good to get it out there. That would be good. And I insist that you call me every day on your honeymoon about this topic, and we will have long, detailed discussions.
We respectfully decline that request.
Of course, please. If you do call me, I will decline the call. enjoy your time away and don't think about us. Okay, so yeah, let's
Yes, sir.
release the that other worksheet. We will meet in a month. Emily, I believe, sorry, Erin, I've been calling you Emily. I'm very sorry. It's of course Erin, and I need more coffee. Which is why I think we should adjourn before our 10 o'clock MPO meeting. So is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
All right, well, thank you, Eric. Just hold that. Next meeting, March 16th. I think it's going to be April 9th.
Yeah, it'll be April. That's a typo from.
All
the
right, cool.
previous, yeah.
April 9th, and without objection, we're adjourned. See you all at 10.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.